Hello, everyone. I see people are starting to come in. We got about 4 people in here, so we'll give it a few minutes, let people kind of trickle in. I know we just opened the meeting right at 8 on point, but I can't see your faces, but I can see the numbers going up. So I see we have 8 participants in here now, so that's good. Now we got 9. Okay, cool. So while you're coming in, I'll just kind of start introducing myself. So my name is Kristen Paraso. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am a tutor as well as a marketing presenter with Applerouth. I also work at a private school called the Love It School. So I am a tutor there, an in-house tutor full-time. So I only carry a couple of tutoring students with Applerouth, and then I also do these online webinars for them because I really like to do them and I think it's fun. So, but yeah, I do work for Applerouth Tutoring Services, and today what we're going to be talking about is the SAT versus the ACT. So we're going to answer the question, which one should you take? I know we probably have some parents in here and we have some students in here. So my tech director, did you want to give the survey? I know last time we did a little survey at the beginning. So I'm not sure if he's going to give you, there you go. So he put a little welcome poll in there. So if you want to go ahead and answer that poll, we're just trying to figure out if you are a student, if you are a parent or a guardian of a student, or if you yourself are an educator. We want to know if you are a student, are you a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, a senior, middle school student, elementary student, and then how can we help you shine this spring? So, you're looking for some test prep, you're looking for academic tutoring, executive functioning coach, and would you like an advisor to contact you? So maybe you don't want help in any of those things, and maybe you don't want to be contacted, but if you do, go ahead and click on what you might be looking for. I know final exams are around the corner. While I'm talking to y'all, we do also we do subject tutoring. So, if your kid is struggling with final exams, just today we got a tutor request for someone needing some help to write a history paper. So we have so many tutors, and a lot of people are graduate students. So we have a lot of people who are very good at very specific things. So if your child or you yourself need help with something, I have even tutored for the GED before. So awesome, cool. Well, we have a few more people in here. So just make sure you fill out that survey because we just like to get an idea if we're speaking mostly to students or parents or educators and so on and so forth. So with that, I will get started. All right. So we're going to talk about the importance and ironically, the unimportance of tests. Not that they don't play an important role, but we're going to talk about why they are not overly important because there's lots of things that colleges are going to be looking at. Okay. So test scores is just one part of what they look at. That's why we don't want your students having stressing over this, right? Because it's just one thing that schools look at. Okay, then of course we're going to talk about how the ACT and SAT are different, and I'll also share their similarities with you. And then lastly, we'll kind of talk about which test might be a better fit for your child. Okay, so there is a question and answer box. And so I can see the questions that you're asking. So if a question pops in your head, feel free to just type it in there. So you don't have to wait until I say, does anyone have any questions? If you have a question, just type it in there. And if it's something I know I'll be talking about later, then I might not answer it right away. Also, I'm not going to be constantly looking at it, but every few minutes, I'll just kind of check, see if there's any questions in there. So just throw them out there and I will eventually get to them. Okay, cool. So first of all, importance and unimportance of tests. So let's just kind of put the tests in context here, right? So we have quantitative data, which is things with numbers, right? And so schools have your GPA. So not only do they have their GPA, but you submit your transcripts. So they're looking at your schedule, the strength and academic strength of your school and the courses you're choosing to take, etc. Okay, and the other quantitative data they have is the SAT and the ACT. So they put that together with qualitative measures, which are things that, like, obviously they're not numerical. So your essay that you write, your teacher and counselor recommendations, your activities, your demonstrated interest, etc. Okay, so I tutored someone who had like a 27 or 28 on the ACT, and they got into Harvard. Okay, so they ended up not going to Harvard because the University of Miami offered them a full ride. So they opted to take that instead. But she had a 27, but she had like a 4.0 GPA, great essays, great recommendations, great activities, a demonstrated interest. And so, see, it's only one part of it. The same with like University of Georgia. It's very competitive. And I tutored a girl and she had a 22, which they say you need a 30 to get into University of Georgia, but she got in. So this is why I'm telling you the tests in context. We're talking about the importance, but also the unimportance of tests. Okay, so they're just one part of many different things that colleges look at. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about this test optional movement. So the test optional movement definitely existed before COVID happened, but I think it just became a little more popular during COVID, because what was happening was it was really hard to find seats in tests. So down here in Georgia, we did not have things closing nearly as much as, say, New York and California did. But I did tutor a student online from California, and he ended up flying to Nevada to take a test. He went to Las Vegas because there were so many testing centers closed in California. And so that's one thing that where this test optional movement came from. And so what it means is that it's not the same as test blind. Okay, so test blind is when schools just straight up do not even want your scores. They're not going to look at your scores, don't submit them at all. They won't even take them. Versus test optional is like, okay, if you want to send them, we'll take them. If not, you don't have to. Okay, so that's what test optional means. So do keep in mind, if it's test optional and you choose not to submit your scores, the scrutiny for the other areas goes up. Okay, so they're going to look more closely at the rigor of your classes, your GPA, your essays, so on and so forth. I mean, all that to say that, like, if you have everything else is like stellar, and then your test score is just kind of average, and you know it's not going to help your submission, and you know that your other stuff is so strong and your test scores would only hurt you, then fine, don't submit them if it's test optional. But do realize that even at test optional schools, most people do submit scores. So I would still take the test a couple times and, see how you do. And then if like that's not going to help me, then, go with test optional. So like I said, most students do still submit scores, and most colleges still consider standardized tests an important factor. Okay, so MIT was test optional. They just went back to requiring tests. I use MIT as an example because, we all know that that's like a wonderful school and very competitive. But they did some research and they found that students' test scores on the ACT and SAT did correlate with how successful that they were in college. So, the higher the scores, the more successful the students were within their program. And so they decided that it was actually a solid measure. And so they did start requiring it. Since I'm in Georgia, speaking to Georgia Tech, UGA, GCSU, they do still require scores. So besides those 3 schools, the rest of the schools in Georgia at the moment are test optional, again, which means you can choose whether or not that you want to submit them. You can apply for a waiver to not submit them, but at Tech and UGA and GCSU, they are required. The Florida state schools, the North Carolina state schools, they've all gone back to requiring scores. So although there are still some schools that are test optional, many schools are going back to requiring now that things are opening back up. Okay, so we're done with the phase on the importance and the unimportance of tests. Okay, so if you're a student out there, don't get overly stressed out about these scores. Some people aren't great test takers. You could get a 22 and still end up getting into UGA if everything else is strong. A 27 still get accepted to Harvard. So it's not the end of the day, but you do want to do your best, and you should at least try to take it and consider submitting scores. Okay, now, please do not try to take both tests. Okay, it's just you're spinning your wheels. I would take a mock test of each. Now, most schools, you're going to be taking a PSAT. So almost all juniors take a PSAT in the fall. The bad part is those scores don't usually come back until like December. And January would be an okay time to start taking tests, but I would probably take my first test before that. But some schools take a PSAT as a sophomore. So I say that because you could use the PSAT as a mock test, because a PSAT is just like an SAT. It's just a few less questions. So you can't score 1,600 because there's not that many questions on it. So, but then you can take a mock ACT, and we'll talk about some opportunities for mocks. But I would highly, highly suggest taking like a practice test of each, but do not prepare for the actual the real test of both. It's just you're spinning your wheels and they're two different, and it just takes you too much time to prepare for both. Okay, so what do these tests actually test? So they test your standard English grammar, they test high school math, arithmetic, like middle school math, algebra, geometry, and a little bit of trig. So don't worry if you haven't taken pre-calc. The trig on there is mostly the trig that you would have had in geometry. Like if you remember what SOHCAHTOA means, it's like that kind of trig. And then reading comprehension, vocabulary in context. So there is no longer just like a separate vocabulary section like there was when I took it. It's just vocabulary in the context of reading. And then graph reading and data interpretation. So on the ACT, there's like a whole separate science section, but the SAT still does test graph reading and data interpretation through its reading test. So 80% of the content is overlapping. So you can see here in the middle, that's all the stuff that's overlapping that are both going to be on there. So like I said, even though the ACT has its own science section, the SAT is still going to ask you to read graphs and interpret graphs because they have two science reading sections. So two of the passages are science for reading. Okay, and then you can see on the ACT, it's more advanced science because it has like a whole science section, and more advanced math. And then on the SAT, there's more advanced reading, and there's definitely more word problems. Okay. Another main difference on the SAT is there's two math sections. So one is calculator and one is non-calculator. Okay, so check in my questions. No questions yet. Great. Okay. All right, so structure, side by side. Let's look at these. You know, if you're like, I just don't like to sit and test, I want to take a shorter test, then the ACT is for you. You'll get out 5 minutes early. That was just a joke. So you will get out 5 minutes early, but the time's about the same, right? They both have 4 sections. It's just that in the SAT, there's 2 math sections. So if math is not your jam, I don't know if the SAT is going to be for you because it's 2 whole sections of math. In the ACT, it's just 1 section of math, and it's 60 questions in 60 minutes, and you get your calculator the whole time. So you still have to know a lot of math, but at least you just kind of keep working and then it'll be over with. So, and then instead of the second math section, it has this science section. So, again, the standalone science section, that's like a major difference. So we will talk a little more about what that's like. So the scoring on the SAT, they split it into like 2 parts. So they have this evidence-based reading and writing, and that's made up by your reading score and your writing score. So I don't mean writing like this. It's not like no essay. For some reason, they call their English section writing. I guess it's because basically what you're doing is like editing and revising a paper. So it's more like that. They just underline the parts that are wrong and you have to fix them. And so those are added together, and that's half of your score. And then your other half of the score is math. So it's out of 800 total. They just put the 2 sections together, and then you get a score out of 800. And those 2 added make the 1,600. Okay, now In contrast, on the ACT, you have a possible 36 points, and then those are averaged. So they add your 4 scores and then divide it by 4. So it says 2 to 36, but I literally think you would have to like leave almost everything blank to get a 2. The lowest I've probably seen is like a 10 or 11. So very hard to get a 2. Okay, so by the numbers, reading, ooh, look at this. Reading on the SAT is a marathon. So get settled and get ready to read. And it is first thing. So you're talking, you show up, you turn in your ID, you sit down at your desk, you open the book, 65 minutes, bam, of reading. Okay, so where the ACT is like a sprint. It's just like, get going, take off, you know, you got 40 questions, 35 minutes, you're just flying. So more reading on the SAT, less reading on the ACT. Now, the good part is it gives you much more time because on the SAT, that's 5 passages. So that's 13 minutes to read and answer questions per passage. On the ACT, there's 4 passages. So you're talking 9 minutes per passage. So depends if you can read that fast. Now the passages are easier to read on the ACT, but it's still really fast. Okay, writing in English, about the same. Now you will notice they give you like 10 extra minutes on the ACT in exchange for like 30 extra questions. That's a lot of English questions, but the good news is you can like miss a lot and still get a pretty high score because there's 75 of them. And English is English. That's the thing that's most similar. Besides there being a lot more questions on the ACT, the questions are pretty much the same. Then math here, there's 2 sections. The non-calculator comes first. It's much shorter, 25 minutes, 20 questions. And honestly, it's not like big calculations. It's not really stuff you would need a calculator for. It's just stuff that a calculator would make you be able to solve the problem easier, I guess I'd say. And then, like I said, 60 minutes, 60 questions on the ACT, the calculator the whole time, and then no science on SAT and science on the ACT. Okay, so like I said, SAT reading marathon, SAT reading, ACT reading, a sprint. So the SAT reading, it has a higher reading level. So they say it's probably like 12th to 13th grade, meaning like freshman in college. Give me 1 second. Let me just close my door to my office. There's some people downstairs and it's kind of loud. So hold on 1 second. Let me just close this. All right. I'm not sure how good or bad my speakers are for my computer, but there are some people downstairs. So sorry about that. Okay. So it's like grade 12 or 13, meaning like college level reading, where the ACT reading is more like 10th grade reading. So the reading passages are harder on the SAT, but you do have more time. And the ACT, it's more modern, but it's really fast. So you can also see, you expect about 1 really hard passage on the SAT. Like when you're going along reading it, you'd be like, oh, this one is impossible. It's like, it's purposeful. So there's one that's definitely harder. It's not necessarily always the humanities one, but there's one that's harder, where the ACT, they're pretty much all like the same level of difficulty. Okay, so common reading questions, they'd ask you things like, how's the passage organized? What point of view is this passage told? Stuff like that. As it's used in line 5, the word blank most nearly means what? So it'll be like weird things, like it'll say, what does the word abroad mean? And then it's like a really random meaning that wouldn't be like in a dictionary. So you're using the context to figure out what the word means. So it's basically an open book test, honestly, because it's like an open book reading test. Because if you look here, here's an example of an ACT question. According to the passage, which of the following is the capability of the Kepler? And then when you look on here, it tells you exactly what it does. It says it makes wide field pictures every 30 minutes, capturing the light of more than 100,000 stars in a single patch of sky between the bright stars, Deneb and Vega. And then it can capture the light of more than 100,000 stars in a single patch of sky. It's literally, I always tell the students, like the answers are right on the page. So once you get good at searching for answers, it's not too hard. So, okay, SAT, these kind of questions are only on the SAT. So we call them evidence-based questions, where you look at 36 and it says, Wolf indicates that the procession she describes in the passage. And then you know that the answer choice is in one of those 4 quotes. So on one hand, this makes it a little easier because you can actually go and look and just look at like 12 through 17, 17 through 19. And you actually know that the answer choice is in one of these 4 places. So that's actually helpful on the SAT. Okay, so that is reading. In writing and English, it's basically the same, like I said, just more questions on the ACT. So you can see you've got 48 seconds per question on the SAT and 36 on the ACT. So it's basically, there's 2 different kinds of questions. It's grammar, basically, does it sound right, versus rhetorical skills, expression of ideas, does it flow right? So at Lovett, one thing I do sometimes is help students with their papers. So I was helping a student today with a term paper. So her teacher had underlined every grammar error that she made, and that was the grammar. And then over to the side, he had placed comments like, do you really need this sentence? Should you add more information here? So that's like the rhetorical skills. It'll say something like, if the following sentence were deleted, what would the passage lose? Or should this sentence be added here? And then you press yes, because, no, because, no, because. So, you know, grammar is like commas, apostrophes, stuff like that, where rhetorical skills, expression of ideas, more about how it flows. So on the SAT, like I said, they call it writing, because I guess it's sort of like you're editing a paper that someone else wrote, and versus English on the ACT, but it's the same thing. So here's an example. On the first one, it's a comma splice the way it's written. And since you can't change the comma, the only way is to change the second part to a dependent clause. And then second one is like subject verb agreement, where you have to realize that the subject is actually the majestic gray eagle. So it should be glides. But you could literally find questions like these on either test. So ACT, SAT, it's kind of the same. And then here's an example of a rhetorical skills question. So it's asking you, given that all the choices are true, which one best accomplishes the purpose of providing specific information? So things I find very boring and games I like, not specific. Playing with Legos and designing complex Lincoln Log masterpieces, very specific. Okay, so there's my answer choice. So that's an example of rhetorical. All right, so talked about reading, talked about writing / English. Now math. Okay, so SAT is like algebra, 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 algebra. Oof, they love algebra. They love lines. They love parabolas. They love percentages. It's so much algebra. That's why I suggest that you should not take the SAT until you are done or close to done with Algebra 2. So if you finish up Algebra 2 your sophomore year, then I'd go ahead and start studying for the SAT over the summer, and maybe take the first one at the end of the summer / beginning of your junior year. But if you're taking Algebra 2 as a junior, I would wait until the March SAT, until you're almost done with Algebra 2, because it's not going to go well if you're not done with Algebra 2, because there's just so much algebra on it. Now, ACT is more like a breadth of mathematics. Okay, there's lots of geometry on there. So, you know, if you were a sophomore, you could probably have a better time like studying for that, because there's so much geometry. There is Algebra 2 on there, but like the SAT is just all algebra, so a lot of it. So they do love lines and parabolas, but they'll also talk about matrices and tons of geometry. So here's a comparison. You can see that the ACT is a little less than half algebra, and we're talking about like Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, whereas the SAT is like 62% algebra. Geometry, just like a tiny little bit of the SAT, but like 23% of the ACT. Don't worry, there's nothing like proofs on there. I know a lot of students hate geometry because of the proofs, but none of that. Arithmetic, data analysis, pretty close, a little more on the SAT, and then trig, 2% versus 7, but do not freak out. I have tutored people who are currently in Algebra 2, and I have taught them the trig that they needed to know to do well on the test. And they've gotten very high scores. So it's not that much trigonometry. Like SOHCAHTOA and like on the ACT, maybe a little more advanced, but not that much. Okay, so here's SAT. I mean, look at all of these words. It's so wordy. It looks like a reading test, right? You got to get all the way through number 4. And then it's just asking you about that equation. It's asking you what the 108 means. So you have to really like, not just graph lines and not just like be able to match a line with an equation. You have to like fundamentally understand like how slope intercept works in the context of real world problems. And the same with 20, like instead of asking you to actually solve a problem, it's just asking you to say which equation would be correct for it. So like read it and pick the equation. So I think it's kind of more like analytical. You're not just solving a problem. You have to like think about what does the 108 mean? How would I make an equation for this? So it's super wordy. Okay, so here's some other problems that would be like on the SAT. So there are some short answer math questions where you have to actually bubble in your answers. Those ones tend to be a little less wordy. So you can see 18 here. It's just a system of equations. Like that's a pretty straightforward question where you just like bubble in the answer to X. So versus ACT, you can see here, these are like a little bit higher. These are stuff you would learn in Algebra 2, matrices, complex numbers, but you don't even have to like solve this. It's just asking which one is undefined. So you just need to know like what makes it undefined and look how many less words there are. And then, you know, solving this problem, but actually you can do imaginary numbers on a calculator. So you could literally plug that problem into a calculator. So, and then geometry on the ACT, yeah, there's some words here, but those words basically say everything that's in the diagram. It says it has a length of 16. You can see that. An altitude of 8. That's on the picture. And then the area of a square is equal to that. What's the length of the side of the square? So got to do a couple steps here. Got to find the area of the triangle and then take the square root of that to find the side of a square. So a couple steps, but just more straightforward. Okay, science section. Honestly, I have a lot of students that I think would be better fits for the ACT. And they'll be like, no, I don't want to do science. So I actually had a student the other day, I talked to her mom and she said she had a much better ACT mock than an SAT, but she was just like convinced that she did not want to take the SAT because she didn't like the science section. So I said, like, give me one session, let me show you how to do science. And if you still feel the same way, then you can do the SAT. Then we can prepare for the SAT. And after like an hour and a half, she was doing the science passages in the allotted amount of time and getting 5 out of 6 correct. So, and believe me, in an hour and a half, I did not teach her science content. I just taught her how to do the science section. So it's that easy. I mean, I don't want to say easy, but if someone sat down and taught you how to do it, like you could greatly improve how you did on the science section. So this girl now is like nailing it. She's taking her mock this weekend. So we'll see how it goes. But she was really afraid of science. And now it's like one of the easiest sections. So if there's students on here, I don't know, you may or may not know Bill Nye. I'm not sure if they watch Bill Nye in school anymore, but I used to watch him a lot, but it is not Bill Nye content. Okay. It's more like the theme song from Bill Nye, right? Like Bill Nye, the science guy. Ooh, that was terrible. I'm sorry. Ruining some people's dinner hour with my singing. Okay. So there'll be like tables like this, right? I will tell you half the time, I don't even know what the passages are about. So if you're reading it and then you're like, what dry particle content? Like, what are they even talking about? It's fine. You don't even have to read the passages. You just read the questions and you look at the tables and graphs. And most of the time you don't even need to fully understand what the science experiment is about. So it could be about dirt. It could be about clouds. because I think I went a little too far. It could be about clouds. So you're just going to read some graphs. You're going to look for trends in the graphs. You're going to find out what you can extrapolate. Ooh, that's a big word, extrapolate. I mean, all that means is like the data is not right in front of you and you have to like get some other information from the data. So you're looking at it and you're saying like, oh, the trend is going up. So then you can extrapolate that it will continue going up, something like that. So when a plant was this tall, how much sunlight did it look? You're just finding data points. Scientific method, they'll be like, why did the scientists use the same brand of fertilizer? And then there's 4 answer choices. When measuring how sunlight affects the plant growth, and how did experiment 2 differ from 1? And it's multiple choice. So you just look at experiment 1, look at experiment 2, look at the tables, then you're like, oh, they changed the variable. So, and then again, the SAT does ask you about this, because remember that in the SAT, there are two reading passages that are related to science. So out of the 5 reading passages, those 65 minutes that you're reading for, 2 of them are on science, and they will have some tables and graphs. And also usually like sometimes the social studies one can have tables and graphs in it as well. Something like a study, something like that. So, okay, that is science. Essays. So SAT does not have an essay anymore. So no essay in the SAT, yay. ACT probably will get rid of it soon. The schools just found that it wasn't helpful information. So they have you write an essay, they have you write a personal statement. They just found that they couldn't even see your essays. All they saw is your score on your essay, and they just found it not to be useful data points. So they stopped caring about them. So check your list of school to see who recommends it. So recommending is not the same as requiring. So, but very few schools require it. So here's the schools that require the ACT essay as of now. So that's literally it. So I just look and check, but mostly you probably do not need that ACT essay, and there is no SAT essay. So great. All right, so now we get to when do I start preparing? So honestly, my answer to that is when are you taking Algebra 2? Okay, so I've tutored a sophomore before. His mom asked me, Applerouth, his mom's called Applerouth, wanted to start tutoring freshman year, but we said like, okay, that's a little early. And so sophomore year, he was in Algebra 2 as a sophomore, and in December, I started tutoring him, and I taught him the trig that he needed to know. I explained the unit circle to him and trig graphs, some basic trig, and he got a 34 on the February ACT when he was a sophomore. And now he's graduating this year, and he has an 80% ride scholarship to Boston University. So, that's kind of an anomaly. I wouldn't suggest most people taking it sophomore year, but if you're like an extremely strong math student, then sure, you could take it sophomore year. Mostly I would suggest taking your first test. If you finish Algebra 2 as a sophomore, I would start studying over the summer. So if you have some time, I know sometimes students are going to camp and going away, but if they have time, I suggest that they start studying over the summer between sophomore and junior year, because they don't have that much to do. They're much less stressed. They don't have schoolwork, term papers, all of that stuff. No sports, or if it is sports, just like a little bit of conditioning here and there. So then when it gets to the fall, there is an SAT at the end of August and an ACT at the beginning of September. That is a great test for a student who's done with Algebra 2 to take as their first test. And then junior year just barely started, or depending where you are in the country, you might not even have started yet at the end of August. And then they've got one test under their belt. Okay, so if they're not taking Algebra 2 until their junior year, I would not suggest starting until the spring, kind of like winter. So The first ACT in second semester is February, early February, and for the SAT is early March. So if you're in Algebra 2 as a junior, I suggest taking the first test in February or March, depending ACT, SAT. Okay, so what's a good score? I mean, that's like a arbitrary question. It's relative, right? Are you trying to apply to Kennesaw State University, or are you trying to apply to Georgia Tech? If you're trying to apply to Georgia Tech, a good score is in like the 30s, right? 32, 33, 34. On the ACT, 1500s if you're taking the SAT. But if you're trying to go to Kennesaw, then like 25, 26 is probably a pretty good score, maybe high 1200s, 1300s on the SAT. So Kennesaw is a school in Georgia, which is much less competitive than Georgia Tech. So, it just depends on where you're trying to go. There's no like good score. It's just the score you need for the school you want to get into, right? Okay, should I send my test results at all? Again, we talked about that in the beginning. Send what makes you look good. Okay, so you don't have to send all of them. We all have a bad day. That's why I suggest taking it more than once. I get the question a lot, how many times should you take it? I'd say 2 to 3 times. Okay, unless you're like the kid I just described who got a 34 the first time he took it. Because I mean, like, what are the chances of going from a 34 to a 36? Like, that's hard. A 34 is only missing a few questions. So, and he was happy with this 34. Most people I know do not get a 34 the first time they take it. So 2 times, if you want to take it a third, fine, take it a third. After that, it's kind of like fatigue, and your score is probably not going to go up the 4th time you take it, because it's just like, that's just too much. And then you're just spinning your wheels and so much pressure. So after the 3rd time, I just cut it off. So a couple reasons to take it more than once is that, we all have good days and bad days. And so your performance could depend on how you are feeling that day, or your child is feeling that day, or your student, if there's educators. But also the curve is set with each test. So if you were to look at like a little scoring table, if it's a particularly difficult test and say like very few people get a perfect score, let's just pick math. So if very few people get a perfect score in math on that particular test day, then you could maybe miss one and still get a 36 on reading, or miss a couple and still get an 800 on the SAT in math. So that happens. But then on another day, maybe the questions turn out to be easier than they expected, and like lots of people get a perfect score. Then you miss one and you went from like an 800 to a 750. So like one day you could miss one and get an 800, and the next time you take it, you could miss one and get a 750. So since the scoring varies, it's a good idea to take it twice, because like you could miss the same amount and get a higher score. So send what makes you look good. If you don't want to get the scores automatically sent, you don't have to. You can like choose to send them later. So super scoring is when you send multiple tests to a school. Like, let's say you took the test 3 times, and like the first time you nailed it on math and you got like a 34, but you never got that score on math again. The next time you took it, you like nailed it on reading and got a 34. And the 3rd time you took it, you nailed it on English and science. So you can send in all 3 scores, and then the school will super score. So they'll put together your highest scores from each of the 4 sections, and that becomes your test score. So not every school does that. If you just do like a Google search and just say like, does University of Georgia super score the ACT? Or does MIT super score the SAT? It will tell you. Okay, so here's like one suggestion. So as you start going through this process, I would start making a list of colleges you think that you might be interested in, or, tell your child to make a list of colleges that he or she or they might be interested in. Okay, so make the list of the colleges, and then you want to check, do they require an ACT essay? Are they test blind? Like they're not going to look at tests at all. Or they test optional, my choice if I send them in. Or do I have to have tests? Okay, so you want to like double check that, and keep in mind that things like keep evolving. So like a year ago, a lot of schools that were test optional are now requiring tests. So, make your list and check it, but then like double check it before you start applying. Cause like, what if you're like, yeah, Harvard doesn't need tests. So that's the school I'm going to, I'm not going to take the test. And then you go to like apply in the fall and they changed their requirements and now like you do need a test. So yeah, make sure you double check that. But then I would also look and like make like a do they super score category, yes or no, so that because some schools, I want to say it's like it's either Alabama or Auburn, it might be Alabama. You have to get it in one sitting. So they don't super score, they just look at each test score individually. So okay, I got a question. Yay, let's see what my question is. Okay. Someone said that they're in California and they do integrated math 2, 3, and then pre-calculus. Yeah, so algebra 2 usually comes right before pre-calculus. So whatever math that comes right before pre-calculus, it's probably that. So the math class before pre-calc, because pre-calc is when you do like trigonometry. So I would be like, either finished with the class that comes before pre-calculus or halfway through that class. So if you're taking pre-calculus as a junior, then at the end of your sophomore year, if you're like done with everything up to pre-calculus, then I would start taking it. If you're a junior and you're taking like this math 2 or 3 class, then I would probably wait till you're like halfway through it, because algebra 2 would be like everything that you would learn that would lead you into pre-calculus. So good question. So thank you for that. I forget that some schools like do it differently. Georgia used to do that. And then like we switched back to the whole algebra, geometry, algebra 2 model. So just always switching back and forth on us. Okay. So the thing is, you want to set realistic goals, right? So that's why you need to take a mock test, because you need to kind of see where you're starting out. So if you take a mock test and you get like a 20, let's not set a goal of like a 34, right? But if you take your first test and get a 30, then like maybe a 34 is a reasonable goal. Okay. So, set a realistic goal and then find the score ranges online. So you can use the College Board site to see how your scores compare to other applicants. So you can look in there and they'll have this thing that looks a little bit like a box plot. And so, that's like your competitive set. So remember that the bottom quartile is predominantly hooked applicants, like athletes. So nothing bad on athletes, but for example, I know this girl who currently attends my school and she is amazing, like state ranked in hurdles. So as a sophomore, she already has schools scouting her. And they've told her like, you just need to keep your grades at B's. And so for her, if she was going to say, like, let's say she's going to go run for Stanford, though most people at Stanford probably have like a, mid 1500s on the SAT, for her, they might be like, okay, as long as you can like break a 1400. Okay. So it's just because it's like her main focus is track, but obviously she still needs to be like smart enough to like survive at Stanford, because they can't have her failing out of her classes, because then she can't run track. But so, yeah, so that's what I mean. I don't mean anything like against athletes. I just mean that there are schools looking at them for their academics as well as their athletics. So that bottom 25% is often like athletes or other hooked applicants, and it's not like straight academic, but the middle score is more like where you want to fall in. And then the higher you are up to that range of scores, like the more likely you're going to get in. But also if you're in that top 25, you're going to be more likely to be getting a scholarship. So you want to aim for schools that you are like in the middle range. And then the higher you up in that range, the more likely you are going to be to getting scholarships. This is a screenshot from the Applerouth website. So if you go to applerouth.com, you can actually make a free account on there, and you can put in schools that you're interested in. And then you can actually input if you've taken a real ACT or SAT, you can like put those actual scores in, or you can put in the PSAT scores, or you can take a mock test with us. And then the little dot is like your scores from the computer system. And then you just add in schools that you're interested in, and it gives you like the information, like here's Kennesaw State. It tells you it's public, how many undergrads, 57% of people admitted. And so you can see here, I was giving Kennesaw as my example here. And so the composite is like a 21 to a 24, and then you got a 23. So Kennesaw would be a good fit for you. And you got an 1130, and the range is like 1070 to 1240. So, you know, like I said, over here, you can use the College Board, or you could go in and make an Applerouth account. So 2 to 3 times, right? You can do all your testing junior year, or you can split it up between junior year and senior year. So, you know, if it were me, I would probably try to get it mostly over in junior year, because I feel like by senior year, you need to be writing your essays, filling out applications. And I feel like it would get kind of stressful to like still be taking the test. But I've had students who have the score they need to get into college, but they're going to take it one more time to get a scholarship. Like, had a kid that was going to Alabama, but they based their scholarships off of the ACT scores. And I think he had like a 30 or something. And if he could get up to a 32, he was going to get $5,000 a year scholarship. So like an extra 20 grand if he could get it up 2 points. And he was on the football team, and we went all the way to like, I went all the way to states that year. So he went to the school that I go to, so that I work at. And so he was like busy until Thanksgiving. And then he was taking that test like in early December. So, you know, he called up Applerouth and they assigned me to him. And we just did like a few sessions in a row to just really bear down. And he got that score he needed. So, but, you know, it wasn't like he was like applying to college. He was already in, and he was taking it one last time to get more scholarship money. So, but like I said, if you took your first test at the end of the summer, if you're around, or sometime in the fall of your junior year, if you're done with all the algebra 2, take the first one in the fall. You could take a second one in like early spring. And then if you need to, take a third one at the end of the school year. If you weren't starting until second semester, so if you weren't going to take your first one until like February or March, then you could take the second one at like May or June. And then if you needed to take a third one, you could take the one that's in August or September. So still not really going into your senior year, just taking it like at the very start of your senior year. Because once you start getting into your senior year, taking it in, let's say there's an ACT in September, an SAT in October. It starts getting like kind of late and really close to the deadlines. And I just feel like it's stressful. So you want to like try to not cause yourself unnecessary stress. Okay. All right. I got another question here. The website is Applerouth. So the name of our company is down at the bottom of the slide. So applerouth.com, or if you just Google College Board, so like BOARD, so College Board, I think it's .org. So if you go to collegeboard.org, if your student has taken, or if you personally have taken the PSAT, like you probably already have an account there, but you can make one and just to like compare your scores, or you can do it on Applerouth. So, okay. So, you know, last part here, what everyone came here for, I guess, based on the title of the webinar, is which test is right for me. So if you like algebra and love to read, the SAT might be for you. If you don't mind like the 65 minutes of reading and kind of harder reading, if you're like really good at like reading difficult text, then yeah, you probably do really well on the SAT. And if you really like algebra, if you like geometry and you're good with like fast paced tests, you know, you're one of those first people that turn in your tests all the time, then the ACT is probably for you, because it is really fast. So I highly suggest, I will say this again, I said at the beginning, but it's worth repeating, that I highly suggest you take a practice test of both. Okay, so on applerouth.com, you can sign up to take a free, that's right, it's free. You can take one free ACT and one free SAT. If your child or you is like hesitant and doesn't feel like taking the time to take 2 practice tests, if you have PSAT scores, that is a good substitute for an SAT mock. And then just take an ACT mock to compare them. So actually only 25% of students show a significantly higher score in one or the other. So if you take it through Applerouth, it'll tell you like, this is your ACT score, and that is equivalent to this SAT score. And then you could just look at your PSAT and be like, what did I get on the PSAT, to help you compare and see which one you're better at. But for the other 75%, you can pick the one you're more comfortable with. So if your scores come up like pretty close, and Applerouth can help you like look at that. And there's like tables online that compare like, a 36 on the ACT is a 1600 on the SAT. Okay, like that's obvious. Those are both the perfect scores. But there's tables where you can look it up. And for the 75% of students that come like pretty close, you just pick. Do you like reading better? Do you like algebra better? Do you like to work faster? Do you want to use your calculator the whole time? Those are the types of things that you'd want to consider. So honest to God, no college has a preference. And I know those of you who might be closer to my age out there, when I was in school, people in the North took the ACT. I grew up in Michigan, and people in the South took the SAT. Southern schools took SAT, Northern schools took ACT. That's not true anymore, right? Because it's just like, we're like much more global and people move all over the place. So honestly, it's whichever one you want. So just really remember, this is not a test that you're smart, nor does it measure you as a person. It's simply a test of how well you do on the test that day. Okay. And it's just one part. So this is not the most important thing, right? It's just one test, one determinant of college. Even if you don't do that great on it, you could still get into the college of your dreams, right? So of course you want to prepare and do your best, but no, don't stress out too much about it. So here are the websites on here. And I do believe that this presentation is sent out to you after this, so you can have these, but you can also get to all of them on applerouth.com. So you can see those mock testing opportunities with a live online proctor. If you are in Atlanta, New York, DC area, Seattle, I believe we have offices in Houston. So there are multiple places in the US where we have actual tutoring centers where you can sign up and actually go in person and take a mock test. But if you don't live in one of those places, we tutor as far away as Peru and the Philippines. So you can take it online with a live online proctor. So it'd be sort of just like me sitting here, but I would be giving you the test. So you would print out your test materials and you would take it. And then there's a little thing where you can score it online. We do have classes and boot camps. So that's a less expensive option than a private tutor. So we have smaller classes and larger classes. So the smallest classes we have come with a 2-hour private tutoring session. So there's no more than 8 students in the class, and then you get 2 hours individually with the tutor, and they go over your mock with you to give you specific suggestions. Also, we do have individual tutoring, of course, for the ACT, SAT. No matter where you live, we do it online, and we also do in person if you live in the cities I just mentioned. But I mean, I've tutored students in Peru and also California, but I also tutor students in person in Georgia. So Applerouth's Guide to Admission Policy for Testing, you can also look at that. We also have materials for sale. So we have a great, robust website with interactive videos and lessons that is all made by Applerouth tutors. And I believe the cost is like $199 for a year subscription, where you can just go through and there's practice tests on there. There's online lessons, there's videos. So that's an option. We also have like books that we publish that are great. And like I tell people oftentimes, they're like, oh, I can't afford tutoring. I'm like, well, at least get this book, and it really helps you walk through it. There's no substitute to having an actual person helping you, but the book is really great and well written, and we wrote our own books. And so you can order those as well. Okay, so now I will say if anyone has any outstanding questions, we have, checking the time, we got a couple minutes left. But you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So yeah, we got LinkedIn. We're in all these different places. So we'll keep you up to date on what's happening at Applerouth. I do actually suggest on Applerouth.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, and it'll just send out these newsletters for changes in the test. So if you're out there listening to this right now and you're a freshman, by the time you're taking this test, the SAT is supposed to be going online. So it's supposed to be a 2-hour online test with like 4 30-minute sections, and the calculator section has a built-in calculator. So that's coming up in a couple of years. It's supposed to be released, I think, in the school year when the freshmen will be juniors. So it's kind of like a year from now, since we're almost at the end of the school year. But if you want to like keep up to date on like testing optional, test blind, what's happening with the essays, sign up for the Applerouth newsletter, and they'll send you like updates. So it's really helpful. So, all right. So that is my last slide. We got a few people left in here. If anyone has any other questions, I usually get more questions than this. Maybe y'all are just, maybe I just said everything and answered all your questions today. Or maybe you're just eating dinner and you're only listening to me like 25 to 50%. So if anyone has any other questions, going once, we still got some people in here. Anyone? Bueller. All right, well, I guess that we are going to wrap things up. So thanks so much for coming today. Really appreciate you giving me an hour of your time on this Tuesday evening. So I hope that Applerouth hears from you again soon. Again, you know, even if it's just to get some more information, take that free mock test, make an account to see what schools you might be interested in, where you fall on the spectrum, or classes, boot camp. Maybe I will see one of you in an online boot camp one of these days. So great talking at all of you. I wish I could talk with you, but sadly that's not how webinars work. But I hope you all enjoy your Tuesday evening, and I will see you guys in the interweb again soon. All right. Have a good night, everyone.